Special operations men stared uneasily at each other and at their colonel, but they stood firm and ready. Major Dillinger's team must have missed me, Hollis mused calmly. No hostages here, sir, said one of his men. All appear to be terrorists. Hollis studied several of the lifeless faces. None of them looked as though they came from the Middle East. It must be the crew from the enemy Bravo, he thought. He turned away and pulled a copy of the ship's deck layout from a pocket and studied it briefly while he talked into his radio. Major, report your status. Met light resistance so far, replied Dillinger. I've only accounted for 4 hijackers. nation's faces. Why, Jesus, an American, gasped First Officer Finney. Collins's face lit up as he rushed forward to pump Hollis's hand. Forgive me, Colonel. I thought you might be one of them. Are we glad to see you? How many hijackers? Asked Hollis. After the Mexicans came on board from the General Bravo, I should judge about 40. We've only accounted for 20. Collins's face reflected the ordeal. He looked haggard, but still stood tall. You freed the two presidents, Senator Pitt and Miss Camille. I'm afraid we haven't found them yet. Collins rushed past him through the doorway. They were held in the master suite just across the passageway. Hollis stood aside in surprise. No one in there, he said flatly. We've already searched this deck. The captain ran into the empty suite, but saw only the rumpled bedclothes, the casual untidiness left by passengers. His stiff-backed composure fell away, and he looked positively stunned. My God, they've taken him. Hollis spoke into his microphone. Major Dillinger. Dillinger took 5 seconds to respond. I read you, Colonel. Go ahead. Any contact with the enemy? None. I think we've pretty well rounded them up. At least 20 hijackers and the VIP passengers are missing. You see a sign of them? Negative. Not so much as a stray hair. Okay. Finish securing the ship and have her crew move her out into the fjord. No can do, said Dillinger solemnly. Problems? The murdering bastards really did a number on the engine room. They smashed up everything. It'll take a week to put the ship back in operation. We've got no power at all. Sorry, Colonel. Here we are and here we sit. These engines aren't taking us anywhere. They've also wrecked the generators, including the auxiliaries. Then we'll have to take the crew and passengers off by lifeboat, using the manual winches. No go, Colonel. We're dealing with genuine sadists. They also trashed the lifeboats, bashed the bottoms out. Dillinger's dire report was punctuated by a deep growling noise that emanated from the glacier and traveled through the ship as if it were a drum. There was no vibration this time, only the growl that turned into a heart-stopping rumble. It lasted nearly a minute before it finally faded and died. Hollis and Collins were both brave men. No one would ever doubt it, but they both read fear in the other's eyes. The glacier is ready to calve, said Hollis grimly. If my crew can get the ship underway, we just might make open water before it gives. Sorry, Captain. That's impossible, said Hollis. I've just been informed by my second-in-command that your engine room has been sabotaged by the hijackers. Collins didn't waste a moment in thought. Then I'll give orders to abandon ship and turn out the lifeboats. They thought of that, too. I'm told the bottoms are whole. Then we're left with cutting away the anchor chains and praying that tide carries us out into the fjord. Believe me, you won't see ebb tide for another 8 hours, said Holmes. You're talking to a man who knows. You're just full of cheerfulness, aren't you, Colonel? Doesn't look encouraging, does it? Doesn't look encouraging, Collins repeated. Is that all you have to say? There are nearly 200 people on board the Lady Flandria. They must be evacuated immediately. I can't wave a wand and make the glacier go away, Hollis explained calmly. I can take a few out in inflatable boats and call in our helicopters to airlift the rest. But we're talking a good hour. Collins's voice came edged with impatience. Then I suggest you get on with it while we are all still alive. He halted as Hollis abruptly swung up a hand for silence. Hollis's eyes narrowed in bewilderment as a strange voice suddenly burst over his earphone. Colonel Hollis, am I on your frequency? Over. Who the hell is this? Hollis snapped. Captain Frank Stewart of the Numa ship Sounder at your service. Can I give you a lift somewhere? Stewart, the colonel burst out. Where are you? If you could see through all that crap hanging on your superstructure, you'd find me cruising up the fjord about half a kilometer off the port side. Hollis exhaled a great sigh and nodded at Collins. A ship is bearing down on us. Any instructions? Collins stared at him, numb with disbelief. Then he blurted, Good God, yes, man. Tell him to take us under tow. Working feverishly, Collins's Ship's two cycloidal propellers, one forward and one aft, thrashed the water as her great diesel engine strained under the load. She was half the Lady Flamborough's tonnage and never meant for tug duty, but she dug in and drove like a draft horse in a pulling contest, black exhaust pouring from her stack. Nothing seemed to happen at first, and then slowly, imperceptibly, a trace of froth appeared around the sounder's bow. She was moving, hauling the reluctant cruise liner from under the shadow of the glacier. Despite the danger, the passengers, crew, and special forces fighters all tore away the plastic sheeting and stood on the decks, watching and willing the struggling sounder forward. 10 meters, then 20, 100. The gap between ship and ice widened with agonizing slowness. Then, at last, the Lady Flamborough was clear. Everyone on both ships gave a rousing cheer that echoed up and down the fjord. Later, Captain Collins would humorously call it the cheer that broke the camel's back. A loud cracking sound trailed the celebrating voices and grew into a great booming rumble. To those watching, it seemed as if the air was electrified. Then the whole forward face of the ice cliff toppled forward and pounded into the fjord like a huge oil tanker being launched on its side. The water seethed and boiled and rose in a 10-foot wave that surged down the fjord and lifted the two ships like course before heading out towards the open sea. The monstrous, newly calved iceberg settled into the deeply curved channel of the fjord, its eyes glinting like a field of orange diamonds under the new sun. Then the rumble rolled down from the mountainside and echoed in the ears of the stunned onlookers, who couldn't believe that they were somehow alive. 58. At first, there was complete confusion, with much shouting and wild shooting. The Egyptians had no idea of the size of the force that had fired on them in the dining hall during the passage of the train. They snuffed at the lights and shot at the early morning shadows until they realized the shadows weren't shooting back. The dirt roads between the wooden buildings took on an eerie silence. For several minutes, the Egyptian hijackers made no effort to leave the dining hall. Then suddenly, half a dozen men, two from the front and four at the rear, broke from the doors, scrambling, crouching, and diving headlong behind the predetermined shelter. Once in position, they laid down a circle of fire to cover the rest of the men, who then followed on their heels. Their leader, a tall man wearing a black turban, directed the men's movements by blowing sharp blinks on a whistle. After a rocky start, the Egyptian terrorist team was everything it was afraid of. Highly trained, practiced, and tough. When it came to house street fighting, they were the best in the world. They were even well led. The leader in the black turban was competent and methodical. They searched building by building, working towards the crushing mill until they half circled it in a crescent. No haphazard assault by a Mars hand-built Vipers. They moved with stealth and purpose. Their leader called out in Arabic. When there was no reply, another terrorist shouted from a different location. They were hailing the guard and mechanics inside the crushing mill, Bit guessed correctly. They were too close now to
Story it is not.
He removed the terrorists'
I'm assuming Fostoria is to the west.
then rummaged through a pocket of his ski jacket and retrieved a small mirror attached to a stretcher. He raised the mirror above the windowsill and extended the hand, twisting it like a mouse. He found the target he was looking for, 90% concealed, but enough showing for a killing shot. It turned the fire select lever from full auto to single. Then he swiftly rose up, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The deadly old tonsil speckled. Black turban took 2 or 3 steps, his face blank and uncomprehending. Then he sang,
Actually,
fell
we
forward,
probably
and
another
pitched
exit
to a
just
ground.
for Fostoria a little
It
further up.
dropped down, lowered his gun, and peered into the mirror again. The terrorists had disappeared. To a man, they had dodged behind buildings or crawled furiously under abandoned and rusting mining equipment. It knew they weren't about to quit. They were still out there, dangerous as ever, waiting for instructions from their second-in-command.
Looking at Ron, I think
pumped a
103.
10-round burst through the thin wooden door of a shed across the road. Very slowly, the door swung open, pushed by a body that twisted and dropped. Still, there was no return fire. They were nobody's fools, thought Pitt. Now
west of Route 23.
Georgina looked at Findlay curiously for a second before
That's the
returning.
first thing, and then I think it's 103 if that goes up. There's no signs.
Right.
It was here, get off at this exit, then all the signs were for Gary.
Right.
Such incredible friends. He wanted to say something, express his feelings of gratitude to them for risking their lives to stop a band of scum when they could have bolted for the boondocks and hidden out until Hollis and his team arrived. But they knew. Men like this needed no words of appreciation or encouragement. There they'd stay, and there they'd find it out. He hoped to God. No, done uselessly. Argue about it later, he ordered, and ready a reception committee if they get past me. He turned and entered the damp and musty-smelling office. He checked his Thompson and set it aside. After quickly building a barrier with 2 overturned desks, a steel filing cabinet, and a heavy iron pot-bellied stove, he lay down on the floor and waited. He didn't wait long. 1 minute later, it came to unmoving attention as he thought he heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. The sound stopped and then came again, soft but unmistakable. He raised the Thompson and propped the grips on the filing cabinet. Too late, gun gave a yell of warning when suddenly an object crashed through the transom window above the door and fell, rolling across the floor. A second came right behind. Pitt dropped low and tried to burrow into the steel cabinet, cursing his lack of forethought. Both grenades went off with an ear-bursting blast. The office erupted in a great roar of shattered furniture and flying wood and yellowed paper. The outer wall was
Lean the other direction and then point the direction we're going. That's confusing.
dazed by the concussion and the deafening clamor between
Got off
us.
the interstate.
Never experienced an
Should have
explosion
gone
in any
to
close
through
proximity.
Cary and gone east. Okay.
Stunned, went down to his toes. The pot-bellied stove had taken the main force of the
Now,
shrapnel,
these were east
yet
and
held
then
its shape.
west.
The rounded sides perforated with jagged
And those are the only options I had. So it'll turn north maybe.
Yeah.
But the only permanent injuries Pitt could find on himself were a deep but thin cut in his left thigh and a 2-inch gash on the cheek. The office had vanished and left in its place a pile of smoldering debris, and for one apprehensive moment Pitt had a vision of being trapped in a blazing fire. But only for a moment. The rain-soaked old wood of the building sizzled slightly in several places, but refused to ignite. With a conscious effort of will, Pitt switched the Thompson to full auto and aimed the barrel at the splintered remains of the front door. assassinate Hala twice, and most certainly want his son dead too. They'll call a truce and negotiate. Pitt looked at his watch. They won't haggle for very long. They know their time is running out, but we might gain a few extra minutes. So what's the plan? Asked Jordina. We stall and fight for as long as it takes. Pitt looked at Gunn. Were the hostages surrounded by the hijackers? No. They were a good 200 meters in the rear, trailing the main party up the railbed, Gunn replied. They were herded by only 2 terrorists. He stared back into Pitt's green eyes, and then nodded in slow understanding. You want me to take out the guards and protect the senator and the rest until Hollis shows? You're the smallest and the fastest. If anybody can get clear of the building undetected and circle around behind those 2 guards while we distract them, you can. Gunn threw out his hands and dropped them to his sides. I'm grateful for the trust. I only hope I can pull it off. You can. That leaves only 3 of you to hold the fort. We'll have to make do. Pitt awkwardly rose to his feet and limped over to the pile of terrorists' clothing he'd tossed on the floor. He returned and held it out to Gunn. Wear this. They'll think you're one of them. Gunn stood there rooted, reluctant to desert his friends. Jordino came to his rescue by laying a beefy hand on the smaller man's shoulder and steering him to a maintenance passage that dropped beneath the floor and ran around the giant crushing mill. You can get up through here, he said, smiling. Wait until things heat up before you make your break. Gunn found himself half under the floor in the passage before he could protest. He took one last look at them. They were all beautiful, and he was heartsick at leaving, not knowing if he would see any of them alive again. You guys be here when I get back, he said. You hear me? Then he ducked under the floor. It was gone. 59. I was paced beside the postage stamp-sized landing pad that the Lady Flamboro's crew had hurriedly fabricated over the swimming pool. A carrier pigeon helicopter settled onto the pad as a small team of men waited to board. Hollis stopped when he heard a fresh outburst of gunfire from the direction of the mine, his face reflecting concern. Load and get 'em airborne, he shouted impatiently to Dillinger. Somebody's alive up there and fighting our battle. The mine must have been the hijacker's escape port, said Captain Collins, who paced at Hollis's side. And thanks to me, Dirk Pitt and his friends stumbled right into them, snapped Hollis. Any way you can get there in time to save them and the hostages? Asked Collins. Hollis shook his head in grim despair. Not one chance in hell. Rudy Gunn was thankful for the sudden downpour of heavy rain. It effectively shielded him as he rolled away from the crushing mill under a string of empty ore cars. Once clear of the buildings, he dropped down the mountain below the mine for a few hundred meters and then circled back. He found the narrow gauge tracks and began walking silently on the crossties. He could see only even seemed to brighten a degree. No, we were careful not to fire at the section of the building where it is parked. I'd stake my father's honor it has not been hit. Only Allah knows whether the commandos have sabotaged it, said Ibn Talib. We'll all see Allah soon if we don't recapture it in flying condition, Ammar said quietly. The only way we can overpower the defenders is to strike hard and penetrate from all sides and crush them by sheer weight of numbers. Perhaps we can use the hostages to bargain our way out, said Ibn Talib hopefully. Ammar nodded. Possibility. Americans are weak when it comes to death threats. I'll parley with our unknown scourge while you position the men for the assault. Take care, Suleiman Aziz. Be ready to attack when I remove my mask. Ibn Talib gave a slight bow and immediately began giving orders to the men. Ammar ripped a tattered curtain from one window. The fabric was once white, but it faded to a dingy yellow. It would have to do, he thought. He tied it to an old broom and stepped from the shed. He moved along a row of miners' bunkhouses, keeping out of sight of the crushing mill until he was across the street. Then he extended the curtain around the corner and waved it up and down. No gunfire tore through the ragged flag of truce, but nothing else happened either. Ammar tried shouting in English. We wish to talk. After several moments, a voice yelled back. No hablo inglés. Ammar was taken aback momentarily. Chilean security police. They were far more efficient than he thought. He could speak fluently in English and get by in French, but he knew little Spanish. Hesitation would get him nowhere. He had to see who stood in his way of a successful escape. He held up the makeshift flag, raised his free hand and stepped out onto the road in front of the crushing mill. The word for peace, he knew, was paz, so he shouted it several times. Finally, a man opened the main door and slowly limped onto the road, stopped a few paces away and faced him. The stranger was tall, with intensely green eyes that never flickered and ignored the dozen gun barrels poking through windows and doorways at his heart. The eyes locked on Ammar only. The black hair was long and wavy, skin weathered a deep copper from long exposure to sun, slightly bushy eyebrows and firm lips fixed in a slight grin. All lent the masculine but not quite handsome face a deceptive look of humorous detachment, with only a trace of cold-heartedness. There was a cut in one cheek that oozed blood, and a wound on one thigh that was heavily bandaged. The shape might have been lean under the boggy, out-of-place ski suit, but Ammar could not make a clear assessment. One hand was bare, while the other was gloved and hung loosely beneath one sleeve of the ski jacket. 3 seconds were all Ammar needed to read this devil. 3 seconds to know he was facing a dangerous man. He searched his mind for the few meager words of Spanish stored there. Can we talk? Yes, that would do for openers. Podemos hablar. The suggestion of a grin widened into a casual smile. ¿Por qué no? Ammar translated that as why not. Hacer capitular usted. Why don't we cut the crap? It said something in English.
Yeah.
Your Spanish is worse than mine. The answer to your question is no. We're not going to surrender. Ammar was too much a pro not to recover immediately, yet he was confounded by the fact his adversary wore expensive skiing clothes instead of battle gear. The first possibility that crossed his mind was CIA. May I ask your name? Dirk Pitt. I am Suleiman Aziz Ammar. I don't really give a damn who you are, Pitt said coldly. As you wish, Mr. Pitt, Ammar remarked calmly. Then one of his eyebrows lifted lightly. Are you by chance related to Senator George Pitt? I don't travel in political circles, but you know him. I can see a resemblance.
across 224, I was going to go home now,
Advised to
but
surrender your weapons and turn over my craft and let go.
figured we should.
Pitt shrugged. Screw you. Amar was shaken by his failure to intimidate Pitt. His voice turned abrupt and cold. How many men do you have? 4? Perhaps 5? We outnumber you 8 to 1. Pitt nodded his head at the bodies scattered beside the crushing wheel. You're going to have to play catch-up. The way I see it, you're about 9 stiffs down the scoreboard. Then as an afterthought, he said, before I forget, I give you my word I won't sabotage your copter. It's yours in pristine shape, providing you can take it. But harm any of the hostages, and I blow it from here to the nearest junkyard. That's the only deal I'll make. That is your final word. For now, yes. A thought crystallized in Amar's mind, and he was swept by a sudden revelation. It was you, he rasped. You led the American Special Forces here. Luck gets most of the credit, it said modestly. But after I found the wreck of the General Bravo and a misplaced roll of plastic, it all fell into place. Amar stood there for a moment in profound astonishment, then recovered and said, you do your powers of deduction and injustice, Mr. Pitt. I readily concede the coyote has run the fox to ground. Fox, said Pitt. You flatter yourself. Don't you mean maggots? Amar looked at Pitt through narrowed eyes. I'm personally going to kill you, Pitt. And I'm going to take great pleasure in seeing your body shot to pieces. What say you to that? There was no fury in Pitt's eyes, no hatred etched in his face. He stared back at Amar with the kind of bemused disgust one might display in exchanging looks with a cobra behind glass at a stick fight. Give my regards to Broadway, he said, turning his back on Amar and walking casually back to the door of the crushing wheel. Furious, Amar hurled down the flag of truce and strode swiftly in the opposite direction. As he moved, he eased an American Ruger P85 semi-automatic 9mm from the inside pocket of his coat. Suddenly he whirled, whipped off his mask, and went into the classic crouched stance with the Ruger gripped in both hands. The instant the sights lined up dead center on Pitt's back, Amar pulled the trigger 6 times in lightning succession. He saw the bullets tear into the middle of Pitt's ski jacket in a ragged grouping of uneven holes, watched as the concentrated impact knocked his hated enemy stumbling forward into the wall of the crushing wheel. Amar slowly dropped his gun, waiting for Pitt to fall. His antagonist, he knew with firm certainty, was dead before striking the ground. 16. Gradually, Amar became aware that Pitt was not acting as he should. Pitt did not fall dead. Instead, he turned, and Amar saw the devil's own smile. Stunned, Amar knew he'd been outwitted. He realized now Pitt had expected a cowardly attack from the rear and protected his back with a bulletproof shield under the bulky ski jacket. And with a numbing shock, he saw the gloved hand hanging from his sleeve was fake. A magician's trick. The real hand had materialized, a hand clutching a big Colt 45 automatic that protruded from the partially unzipped ski jacket. Amar threw up the Ruger again, but Pitt fired first. Pitt's first shot hit Amar in the right shoulder. The second
Slight left to stay on mid-block Upis.
Nickel plate.
Take the next left to stay on mid-block Upis, then turn right onto South Wood Street. Turn right onto South Wood Street.
Yes.
I guess. Man, that's
In 1,000 feet, turn right onto West North Street.
kind of a little crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on Wood Street. Am I supposed to turn here?
I get the next one.
Next one?
West North.
West one. Okay, thank you. This is center.
Center.
Take the next right onto West North Street, then your destination will be on the left.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Your destination is on the left.
So would it be here or maybe this one? I'm not really sure. I guess it's the other one. Okay, well, it's easier to go back than to come down, so it's alright. I wasn't sure where the front pull-in was. Kind of looked like that would be it for a minute. Do not enter and all that stuff. Guess that's for parking there, but where's the tracks? This is the rail center, but where's the diamonds? There's not a track in the vicinity. Used to be. There was a line came right up here and then the house track was right there. But that's all long gone.
I tried this here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, start.
Down here.
Head south toward West North Street. In 1,000 feet, turn right onto North Poplar Street.
These old cantilever towers for the power lines.
In 1,000 feet, turn left onto East South Street.
That's Tiffin. State Farm.
Take the next left onto East South Street. In 600 feet, turn right right onto South Poplar Street.
Why it dodged me all the way around that way?
Who knows?
Take the next right onto South Poplar Street.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why. Iron Triangle Rail Park.
Yeah.
In 1,000 feet, turn left. Turn left.
Not running the track, dearie.
Cross these. Get your picture
Right there.
done. Just right in here. There's nothing.
Probably,
No building or anything.
probably down that street there. Railroad place.
Okay. Oh, so that's just kind of pointing us down that way.
Yeah.
In 1,000 feet, slide right. Turn left. In 1,000 feet, slide right.
Just off the top of the watchtower.
Slide right, then your destination will be on the right.
Okay, cool.
Your destination is on the right.
Got an Michigan.
Yeah. Ouch. Careful. Save.